Hi, I'm Travis Townsend, here with the When the Cops Come Knockin team.
And I'm Trinity Townsend.
And we're here chatting about this latest incident in South Carolina with the young lady being assaulted by the police officer in the classroom during classroom time. Obviously, this is a hot button topic. There's a lot of discussion about it in the news, social media, and around people's coffee tables and kitchen tables. And we've heard a lot of perspectives on it. And so my brother and I, we actually decided to discuss the issue ourselves. We kind of wanted to bring you in on some of the things and some of the points that we really think people should consider with respect to the incident. So you give your perspective on it, and I can kind of share some of my thoughts as well.
Well, I think what stands out to me is the fact that the officer used excessive force. And for me, I understand that a police officer, there are times where they have to use force. That's just part of the job. The thing is, they have to differentiate between those times and discern those times where they have to use a certain amount of force, and it always has to be the appropriate amount of force. And sometimes they don't have to use force at all. Right. In this situation, to remove a student from the classroom, from what we saw, he took the young lady and flung her across the floor. Right. Instead of removing her in a much less, let's just say, violent way. And that's the problem.
So now I'll tell you, one of the things I hear a lot is that there should never have even been a police officer in the room. We're talking about a school, teens, you got an adult, teacher supervising, and we have a cop there. And it seems to be, there's a lot of angst about the fact that there's a law enforcement officer on the scene talking to a student who had not sort of initiated any violence or been physical with anybody. And, my thoughts on that, and I can understand, where, if you're, a parent, particularly a parent, if you got a daughter, a sister or something like that, and you're just thinking, why is there a cop in the room? But what we do want the audience to consider, and law enforcement officers are authorized to use force. And there are situations in schools where teachers cannot resolve a situation, administrators cannot resolve a situation, particularly with respect to a student who refuses to remove themselves from a classroom. And then when a law enforcement officer is called, they're mainly called because they do have the authorization to use force or become physical. But as my brother mentioned, I think you're spot on. I mean, the force should only be necessary and only to the extent necessary to remove the student from the situation. Here in this situation, we have a full-out assault, sort of an attack that, was just, you see the video, it just catches your eye and throws you off.
Right, and I think there's some nuances there that we often miss because everybody gets so emotionally invested and they don't look at the step away from the situation and take a broader view. But I can tell you as a former teacher, one of the things that you have to think about is group dynamics. For instance, if the teacher doesn't have control of the classroom, it's the students who have control of the classroom. So say there's a student who basically confronts the teacher and challenges that teacher. Well, let's say the teacher doesn't do anything. Well, what happens is the rest of the group realizes that teacher is weak. And what happens is the teacher doesn't have control over the classroom. Now, I think a lot of people like to say, they use this phrase when it comes to teachers, and they like to say, get control of your classroom. And then they leave it at that. But what they don't say is how, because that's the big thing. It's not so much getting control, it's how do you get control. And so when you think about group dynamics, you have to think that the teacher, who's the leader of the pack, essentially, has to have control of the classroom. And there, like my brother said, there are situations where, let's say, there's a standoff between the student and the teacher, and the teacher can't put their hands on the student to remove the student. Well, then that teacher may have to call in one of these resource officers to assist.
Now, we've actually learned a lot about the young lady who was assaulted in this video after the fact. I think there are some stories out there that indicate that she may have lost parents and is with foster parents and was unresponsive in the classroom. And that sort of, we're getting some explanations as to why she might have, been quiet. I think that was the report. She was being quiet, and the teacher asked her to leave the classroom, and so on. Led to the situation where we had the officer there. But one thing that strikes me is that I don't know that a law enforcement officer necessarily knows all of that when they come to the scene, and I don't know that the law actually holds them accountable for that type of information that we get after the fact. When they come to the scene, they're sort of thinking, hey, I've been called here, I'm here, they're asking me to do something, there's a situation, there's a student that has been requested to leave and they won't, and I've asked them to leave and they won't. From pretty much any education or any training in law enforcement officer is going to be authorized to remove that individual, student, adult, whoever it is. And so I think it is difficult. This is a tough situation. I mean, it's sad, particularly for the student who, regardless of what you're going through and what you do, you just don't deserve to be suplexed or body slammed or tossed across the room. In particular, I think when the officer put her on the ground, he slammed her across the room, right, which is just, that's blows your mind. But I do think that we would be remiss if we don't talk about some of the things that maybe we can do to prevent these types of situations. If you got a bad acting officer, there's very little you can do. If an officer comes in, maybe you comply, and they still want to toss you around. So we by no means want to talk and say that, hey, you can always prevent a situation like this. But if there's anything you can do, we want to at least raise that. So can you point out some things that maybe could have been done to at least start to try to prevent this situation, right, on everybody's side?
Right. And let's just put this disclaimer out there again, because again, there are a lot of people who are emotionally charged, they feel a certain way, and so we want to say, first off, in no way do we condone the officer's behavior. We don't want to in any way give that impression. Right. One of the tenets of the lessons that we teach is that we take the world as it's given us, right? But we also teach you how to respond in a practical way. So what I mean by that is, yes, the officer was ridiculous. He overreached. He used excessive force. There's no excuse. There's no justification. And he was punished for it accordingly. He was fired. Right. He was fired. And there's probably more legal ramifications to follow. So that happens. The thing is, we also approach it this way. We want to teach you also how to keep those type of situations from escalating. And that's the practical aspect of it. You'll have plenty of people that'll also tell you the other aspect, but we can fight battles on more than one front. We can say, here's the practical way to de-escalate that situation when you're in it, and then here's how you fight that type of thing from happening to yourself and other people on a broader scale later. So getting into that, as a practical matter, let's just start at the beginning. When an officer gives you an order, it's generally best to comply with that order if they're not asking you to do something that's illegal or that's extremely harmful to you in a tangible way. So that's rule number one. And look, we all have to obey the law. Police officers are authority figures, and they're imbued by the government to have authority by law. So let's get clear on that. That essentially when a police officer gives you an order, if what they're asking you to do or ordering you to do is not illegal, you need to comply. And to sort of add, we're talking about in the context of taking the situation. We already know there's an environment where, quite frankly, there are some law enforcement officers who are just not trained properly. They don't have the best of intentions. And we're not talking about all law enforcement officers, but we do know that they exist, and they're out there and they're walking the streets, they're patrolling, they're coming to the scene of situations. And given that we know that, we have to start thinking about the things that we can do in connection with avoiding running into that guy.
We don't want to run into that person. We don't want to create a situation where we empower that person to use force based on their authority to use force. We don't want to do things and do acts that by the lines and rules of their regulations, they can, rub their fingers and hands and say, okay, now I have an opportunity to do some of the things, the wrong things that they would be inclined to do, right? So, as my brother mentioned, we want to fight this thing on both fronts. We got to take it to the law enforcement when they misbehave, when they're abusive. We need to bring legal action. We need to call for discipline on the job, such as firing of officers who engage in terrible acts that we see in South Carolina at that classroom. But we also need to make sure that in anticipation of those folks who are still out there while we're working to change the laws, change the procedures, change the training, we still need to be advising our young people on how to navigate and make sure we reduce incidences of interaction with that type of law enforcement officer. So that's kind of what we really want to focus on. There's no blaming the victim here. There's also no mitigation of the officer's acts. But I'll tell you this. I'm thanking my lucky stars that young lady wasn't killed or badly injured or killed. And the thing about that is, if I can tell a young person something that will limit their incidences or involvement in a place where a bad officer acting terribly could actually harm them or kill them, I'm going to give them that advice. I'm going to tell them what they can do to try to limit that. And then we'll go forward. We're gonna get after law enforcement officers that misbehave and behave in abusive, aggressive ways.
And that's fully understanding, by the way, that look, the young lady, as far as I could tell, she didn't attack the officer, so he used force that he didn't need to. Now, the general rule when it comes to people in general and police officers is you use the amount of force that's basically equal to the force being used against you. So let's say, if there was a situation where he reasonably felt that he was going to be physically hurt, then you would use the force that would be needed to negate that. Here's the thing. It didn't appear that she used any force, and so the officer went beyond what he should have. So we want to stress that. Because what happens is a lot of times, again, people feel very strongly and they kind of overlook the nuances. They overlook the entire situation. And what happens is rationality goes out of the window.
We could probably talk about this for days. If you guys want to join the conversation, feel free to check out our YouTube page and tell us what you think in the comment section. You can also follow our information and some of the activities we have going on by liking our Facebook page and following us on Twitter at Cops Come Knockin and Instagram at Cops Come Knockin. And
you can also visit us at our webpage at www.copscomeknockin.com, or you can email us at info@trinity.com.
We're looking forward to hearing from you because we always take the feedback and the thoughts of the citizens because it's important, and we're going to get back to you.